The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with the usual noise. Representatives from hundreds of worlds talked over each other. Their voices echoed off the crystal walls that reached high into the dome above. Some had forearms, others had scales that changed color when they spoke. A few floated in special tanks filled with thick purple gas. All of them thought they were very important. Jiho Kim stood quietly at the human podium. He was a small man with graying hair and a simple black suit. Nobody paid attention to him. They never did. For 50 years, humans had been part of the council, but they were always treated like servants. They fixed things. They built things. They cleaned up messes, but they were never really listened to. Jiho cleared his throat and activated the speaking device. A soft chime rang through the hall, but most of the aliens kept talking. He waited patiently. This was how it always went. Humans always waited. Honored council members, Jiho said in his calm voice, I have an announcement from the Human Federation. A few representatives glanced his way. The Thrakari delegate, a large creature with 6 eyes, made a clicking sound that meant annoyance. Chancellor Vexar, who looked like a giant blue lizard wearing golden robes, waved one clawed hand dismissively. Make it quick, human, Vexar said. We have important matters to discuss. The hegemony trade disputes require immediate attention. Jiho nodded politely. He had expected this response. Of course, Chancellor. I will be brief. The Human Federation hereby formally withdraws from the Galactic Council. We will begin immediate evacuation of all human settlements, facilities, and personnel from Council space. We thank you for 50 years of cooperation. He placed a data pad on the podium and stepped back. The hall fell silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then everyone started shouting at once. Preposterous, screeched the Zephyrian ambassador, her feathers turning bright red. You cannot simply leave. What about your contracts? Demanded the Vorthon representative. You maintain our atmospheric processors. Chancellor Vexar slammed his massive fist on his desk, making the crystal ring like a bell. Silence. The room went quiet. He stared down at Jiho with his cold yellow eyes. Explain this nonsense, human. Jiho remained calm. There is nothing to explain, Chancellor. We are exercising our right under Article 447 of the Council Charter. Any member species may withdraw with 6 months' notice. We are providing that notice now, but why? Asked Counselor Lithan, one of the few aliens who had ever spoken kindly to humans. What has prompted this decision? Jiho looked around the hall. He saw the confusion on their faces. Some looked angry. Some looked worried. A few looked like they were trying to remember what humans actually did for them. We have served faithfully for 5 decades, Jiho said quietly. We have maintained your stations, repaired your ships, managed your trade routes, and solved countless problems. Yet we remain second-class members. We have no vote on major decisions. Our research is ignored. Our suggestions are dismissed. We are told we are primitive, yet you call us whenever something breaks. The Thrakari delegate made that clicking sound again. You are primitive. You barely have proper space travel. Your worlds are small and weak. Perhaps, Jiho said with a small smile. But we are tired of being treated as such. We prefer to be primitive in our own space rather than servants in yours. Chancellor Vexar leaned back in his great chair. His expression was unreadable. Very well. If you wish to sulk in some corner of the galaxy, that is your choice. How long will this evacuation take? 6 months as required by law. We will remove all human personnel and equipment from Council space. We will transfer no technology or operational knowledge to replacement species. All contracts will be terminated according to their terms. Equipment? The Vorthon representative sounded worried now. What equipment? Jiho's smile grew slightly wider. All of it. The atmospheric processors we built and maintain, the hyperspace beacons we installed and monitor, the waste recycling systems we designed, the power grid stabilizers we service daily, the mining equipment we operate, the transportation networks we manage. All of it belongs to humanity under the original settlement agreements. A murmur ran through the hall. Many of the representatives were looking at each other with uncertainty. They were beginning to realize that humans did more than they had thought. Surely you do not mean to take everything, Counselor Lithan said carefully. Many of these systems are vital to entire worlds. Yes, Jiho agreed. They are. We built them to be vital. We made ourselves indispensable, hoping it would earn us respect. Instead, it made us invisible. So now we choose to become visible by disappearing. Chancellor Vexar waved his hand again. Fine, go. We managed before you arrived. We will manage after you leave. Perhaps this will teach other species not to make unreasonable demands. Jiho bowed slightly. We hope you are correct, Chancellor. For everyone's sake. He picked up his datapad and walked toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the suddenly quiet hall. As he reached the great doors, he turned back one last time. We leave with no anger, he said. Only sadness. We hoped for partnership. Instead, we learned that being useful is not the same as being valued. May you find happiness in your independence. The doors closed behind him with a soft whisper. In the hall, hundreds of alien representatives sat in uncomfortable silence. They were already trying to remember exactly what humans did for them. The list was longer than any of them had realized. Far away on ships scattered across the galaxy, other humans were already packing. Minji Park stood in the control center of mining station Kepler 7, watching her teams carefully disconnect the quantum extractors. They would take every bolt, every wire, every piece of equipment they had installed. How long until we're done here? Asked her assistant Doyun Park. 4 days, Minji replied. Then we move to the next station. We have 847 worlds to clear and 6 months to do it. Think they'll try to stop us? Minji shook her head. They still don't understand what we do. They think we just push buttons and carry tools. They'll figure it out eventually. She looked out at the massive mining operation that fed raw materials to 67 council worlds. In 4 days it would be dark and silent, just like the hundreds of other operations humans would abandon. Let's get back to work, she said quietly. We have a lot to pack. 3 months had passed since Jiho Kim's announcement. Captain Sung-Ho Lee stood on the bridge of his cargo ship, watching the last human transport vessels leave Centauri Trade Hub. The massive station hung in space like a glittering city, its lights stretching for kilometers in every direction. Final transport is away. Captain, reported his navigation officer. All human personnel evacuated. All equipment loaded. Sung-Ho nodded. Take us out. Set course for the Kepler expanse. As his ship began to move away, Sung-Ho noticed something odd. Some of the lights on the station were flickering. He frowned. The power grid should be stable for years unless... Sir, his engineer called out. I'm reading power fluctuations from the station. The main stabilizers are cycling incorrectly. Sung-Ho understood immediately. The aliens who had taken over the station didn't know how to balance the power load. They had the instruction manuals, but they didn't understand the thinking behind them. Humans had always made small adjustments, tiny fixes that prevented problems before they became serious. Not our problem anymore, he said, but his voice was sad. Jump to hyperspace. The stars stretched into lines of light, and Centauri Trade Hub disappeared behind them. On the council world of Nexus Prime, Dr. Hyeri Cho was packing her personal belongings. She had been the chief systems engineer for the Planetary Management Center. For 12 years, she had monitored the delicate balance that kept 3 moons in perfect orbit around the planet. Dr. Cho, a voice called behind her. She turned to see Morith, a tall Zephyrian with bright blue feathers and 4 arms. He was her replacement, supposedly the best engineer his species had produced. The moon stabilizers, Morith said, his feathers shifting to worried yellow. I have been studying the manuals for weeks, but there are problems I do not understand. Hyeri looked at him kindly. Morith was brilliant. His mathematics were perfect, his technical knowledge impressive. But he thought like a machine, not like a human. What kind of problems? She asked. The equations are wrong, he said, showing her a datapad. According to the gravitational calculations, the 3rd moon should have crashed into the planet years ago. But it orbits perfectly. The manuals say to make adjustments that violate basic physics. Hyeri smiled sadly. The manuals aren't wrong, Morith. They're incomplete. We never wrote down the intuitive parts, the feelings, the guesses, the little adjustments we made based on experience. Feelings have no place in engineering, Morith said stiffly. Human engineering is different. We don't just calculate. We feel the rhythms of the system. We notice patterns that don't show up in the math. That 3rd moon wobbles slightly every 47 days. Not enough to register on your sensors, but we could feel it in the data. So we make a tiny adjustment to compensate. Morith's feathers turned pale green with confusion. But how do you know when to adjust? Practice, instinct. 50,000 years of evolution on a world that tried to kill us every day. We learned to sense danger before it became obvious. She picked up her last box. Good luck, Morith. You're smart enough to figure it out, but it will take time you may not have. As Hyeri left the building, she felt the ground tremble slightly under her feet. The moon wobble was starting early this cycle. Commander Taemin Young received the first distress call while his evacuation fleet was passing through the outer rim. The message came from asteroid mining facility Delta 12, where his teams had finished packing just 2 weeks ago. Human vessels, please respond, the alien voice pleaded. This is Station Manager Crixtel. Our extraction systems have shut down. We followed all procedures, but the quantum resonators will not restart. Taemin stared at the communication screen. He recognized Crixtel's voice. The Vorthan had been polite but dismissive when humans worked at the facility. Always giving orders, never asking for advice, sir? His communications officer asked. Should I respond? Taemin was quiet for a long moment. He thought about his orders from Admiral Yuna Kang, complete communication silence until they reached human space. But he also thought about the thousands of beings who depended on those mining operations. No, he said finally. Maintain silence, but he did make a note in his log. The first crack was showing. Over the next few weeks, more calls came. Terraforming stations with failing atmospheric processors, trade routes with malfunctioning hyperspace beacons, agricultural worlds where the weather control systems had gone haywire. Admiral Yuna Kang read the reports from her flagship deep in human space. Each message was the same story. The aliens had the equipment, the manuals, even recordings of human procedures, but they couldn't make anything work properly. They don't understand systems thinking, she said to her aide, Captain Kyungmin Oh. They see each part separately. Humans see the whole machine. Should we help them? Kyungmin asked. Yuna shook her head. Not yet. They need to understand what they've lost before they can appreciate what we offer. On the world of Theron 5, engineer Yoonji Woo watched through long-range sensors as the Thrakari Empire tried to restart the orbital elevators. The Thrakari had always been hostile to humans, claiming they were weak and stupid. Now they were trying to prove they didn't need human help. The massive space elevators were marvels of engineering. They stretched from the planet's surface up to orbital stations, carrying millions of tons of cargo every day. Humans had built them using a complex system of gravitational compensators and structural harmonics. They're increasing power to the gravitational nodes, Yoonji reported to her team. The load factors are climbing past safe limits. Do they know what they're doing? Asked her assistant. They think they do. They're following the technical specifications exactly, but they don't understand the timing. Each elevator has a unique resonance frequency. You can't just turn them on like light switches. The sensors showed power readings climbing higher and higher. The Thrakari engineers were pushing the system beyond its design limits, trying to force it to work. There, Yoonji said quietly. Harmonic cascade failure in 3, 2, 1. The first elevator shuddered and twisted. Stress fractures appeared along its length as the gravitational fields went out of balance. The massive structure began to collapse, falling toward the planet like a giant metal snake. 2 more elevators failed in the next hour. By the end of the day, 7 of the 12 elevators were damaged beyond repair. The Thrakari homeworld lost most of its orbital infrastructure in a single day. President Jae-won Shin read the intelligence reports with mixed feelings. Part of him felt satisfaction that the aliens were learning the truth, but part of him felt sad about the destruction and waste. How many worlds have declared emergencies? He asked Intelligence Director Soo-young Lim. 17 so far, she replied. Food distribution networks failing on 6 worlds. Power grid collapses on 4 more. 3 agricultural worlds losing their crops because the weather control systems are malfunctioning. And the Council's response? They're trying to hire engineers from non-member species. But no one else has experience with human-designed systems. A few worlds have offered massive payments for any human willing to return and help. Jae-won nodded. And our people's response? Complete silence as ordered. Though some are finding it difficult to ignore the suffering. Jae-won understood. Humans had always been helpers by nature. It was hard to watch problems they could easily solve. But they had tried helping for 50 years and been treated like servants. Now the galaxy needed to learn that help was a gift, not a right. Maintain the communication blackout, he ordered, but monitor the situation carefully. When they're ready to talk as equals, we'll listen. Far away on the edge of council space, the effects continued to spread. Systems failed. Infrastructure crumbled. And the aliens began to realize that the quiet humans had been far more important than anyone had imagined. The galaxy was learning a hard lesson about taking people for granted. 6 months after the human exodus began, Chancellor Vexar stood before an emergency session of the Galactic Council. His normally perfect blue skin was pale with stress. His forearms gestured wildly as he tried to explain the scope of the disaster. "The hegemony trade routes are collapsing," he announced to the packed hall. "We have lost navigation beacons on 47 major hyperspace lanes. Ships are arriving days late or not at all. Some have been lost completely." Chancellor Vexar leaned forward in his great chair. The arrogant confidence he had shown 6 months ago was gone. "How is this possible? We have thousands of navigation specialists." "That's just it," Vexar replied, his voice shaking. "We thought we did. But the humans designed the entire beacon network. They calibrated each beacon individually, accounting for local gravitational anomalies and hyperspace distortions. Our specialists can operate the beacons, but they cannot adjust them." A murmur of worry rippled through the assembly. The trade routes were the lifeblood of galactic civilization. Without them, worlds would starve and economies would collapse. "What about the technical manuals?" demanded the Thrikari delegate. "Surely the humans left instructions." "They did," Vexar said bitterly. "Thousands of pages of specifications, diagrams, and procedures. But none of it makes sense without understanding their methodology. Every beacon requires constant micro-adjustments based on sensor readings that seem random to us, but followed patterns the humans could see." In the Kepler expanse, engineer Do-hyun Park monitored the Council's communications from his new workshop. He was part of the team that had designed the beacon network 15 years ago. He knew exactly why it was failing. "They're trying to treat each beacon like a separate unit," he explained to his colleagues. "They don't understand that the entire network is one giant system. Each beacon talks to the others, sharing load and compensating for fluctuations. Change one setting without adjusting the others, and the whole network starts to drift out of alignment." His assistant, a young technician named Min-Soo Kim, shook his head in amazement. "How did we make it so complex?" "We didn't," Do-hyun replied. "Space is complex. Hyperspace is chaos barely held in check. We just learned to dance with the chaos instead of fighting it." On the Council world of Nexus Prime, the situation was becoming desperate. The 3 moons that had orbited peacefully for decades were starting to drift. Moreth, the Zephyrian engineer who had replaced Dr. Hyeri Cho, worked frantically at his control station. "The 3rd moon is 2 kilometers off course," his assistant reported. "At this rate, it will collide with the 2nd moon in 14 days. Moreth's feathers were bright red with stress. He had tried every calculation, every adjustment procedure in the manuals. Nothing worked. The moons seemed to follow their own mysterious logic. "Contact the human ship that left last week," he ordered desperately. "Offer them anything they want if they'll return and help." But his communications officer shook his head. "No response, sir." They maintained complete silence. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the cascade of failures was accelerating. On the agricultural world of Series 7, the weather control satellites had malfunctioned during the spring planting season. Instead of gentle rains, they produced violent storms that destroyed half the crops. The Vorthan technicians operating the system followed the procedures exactly, but the satellites kept making incorrect adjustments. They didn't understand that weather control required intuition as much as science. Humans had learned to read the subtle signs in atmospheric data, knowing when to override the automatic systems and when to let them run. Dr. Nari Kim, humanity's chief xenosociologist, watched the reports from her office on Haven Prime, humanity's new capital world. She was writing a detailed analysis of what was happening. "The fundamental problem," she dictated to her recording device, "is cognitive specialization versus adaptive thinking. Each alien species evolved to excel in specific areas. The Zephyrians are brilliant mathematicians but lack intuitive reasoning. The Vorthons are masters of logistics but cannot handle unexpected variables. The Thrikari are excellent builders but poor at maintenance and adjustment." She paused, looking out at the busy construction sites where humans were building their new civilization. Humans evolved differently. Our world was harsh and unpredictable. We learned to be generalists, to adapt quickly to changing conditions. This made us appear primitive to specialists, but it gave us something they lack: systems thinking. We see connections between things that seem unrelated. We notice patterns in chaos. We make intuitive leaps that turn out to be correct. The door chimed and her assistant entered. "Dr. Kim, we're receiving reports of massive infrastructure failures across Council space." Power grids, transportation networks, even basic life support systems. Nari nodded sadly. It's accelerating. Each failure makes the others worse. They're discovering that their civilization was more fragile than they realized. On the mining world of Kepler-12, the situation was becoming critical. The automated mining systems had shut down completely when the human operators left. The alien replacement crew had managed to restart some of the equipment, but they were making dangerous mistakes. The quantum extractors are overheating, reported Chief Engineer Yulgo to his Vorthon supervisor. The humans always ran them at 67% power, but the manual says maximum efficiency is at 95%. Then run them at 95%, the supervisor ordered. Why would we accept lower efficiency? What they didn't understand was that the humans had learned through experience that the extractors became unstable at high power levels. The instability didn't show up in tests, only during long-term operation. But the humans had felt it in the subtle vibrations and energy fluctuations that their instruments could barely detect. 3 days later, Extractor Unit 7 suffered a catastrophic failure, creating a quantum cascade that destroyed half the mining facility and killed 12 workers. The news reached President Jae Shin within hours. He sat in his office, staring at the casualty reports. This was the first time people had died because of the evacuation. Sir, his aide said quietly, the Vorthan government has offered us sovereign control over the Kepler system if we'll return and stabilize their mining operations. Jae was quiet for a long moment. What does Admiral Kang recommend? She says we should wait. The deaths are tragic, but if we return now, nothing will have changed. They'll treat us as emergency workers, not as partners. And if we wait, more people will die. But eventually the Council will have to accept us as equals or watch their civilization collapse. Jae made his decision. Continue the communication blackout, but send humanitarian aid to the families of the dead workers. Make sure everyone knows it comes from humanity. Across Council space, similar disasters were multiplying. The hegemony core worlds were experiencing rolling blackouts as their power grids struggled without human oversight. Stellar engineering projects that had run smoothly for decades were showing dangerous instabilities. On Rigel Station, the massive Starlifting operation that provided power to 43 worlds was beginning to malfunction. The humans who had managed it had taken all their calibration data and procedural knowledge with them. The alien engineers were following the basic operations manual, but they were missing thousands of tiny adjustments that kept the system stable. The stellar plasma flow is irregular, reported the new chief engineer to his supervisors. I recommend we shut down the operation until we can solve the problem. But shutting down would leave billions of beings without power. The Council ordered the engineers to keep working, hoping they could figure out the problems before something terrible happened. They were wrong. The instabilities in the Starlifting equipment created a feedback loop that sent a pulse of uncontrolled energy toward the star. The pulse was small by stellar standards, but it triggered a solar flare that knocked out communications across 3 star systems. As reports of the disaster spread, panic began to set in across Council space. The aliens were finally realizing that humans hadn't just been workers and maintenance staff. They had been the nervous system of galactic civilization, sensing problems and making corrections before anyone else even noticed there was a problem. Chancellor Vexar, who had dismissed humanity's departure so casually, now faced the collapse of everything he had worked to build. His advisors brought him worse news every day. Trade was breaking down. Colonies were going dark. Ancient enemies were preparing for war, sensing weakness in the Council's failing infrastructure. How long until the humans' evacuation is complete? He asked his aide. 2 more months, Chancellor. But at the rate systems are failing, we may not have 2 more months. For the first time since humanity had left, Vexar began to understand what they had really lost. Not servants or maintenance workers, but the invisible foundation that had held their entire civilization together. And now that foundation was gone. 1 year after humanity's exodus began, the Galactic Council chambers were half empty. Many representatives had been recalled to deal with crises on their homeworlds. Those who remained looked tired and desperate. The crystal walls that had once gleamed with pride now seemed to mock their predicament. Chancellor Vexar was gone. The great blue lizard who had dismissed humanity so casually had been removed from office when his own species blamed him for the disaster. In his place sat Counselor Lythan, a more thoughtful leader who had always treated humans with respect. The situation grows worse each day, Lithin announced to the assembled delegates. We have received distress calls from 340 worlds. Basic services are failing across half our territory. Some colonies have lost contact entirely. The Thrakari delegate, his 6 eyes dim with exhaustion, spoke up. My homeworld has declared martial law. Without the orbital elevators, we cannot move supplies efficiently. Riots have broken out in 17 cities. The Zephyrian colonies are abandoning their outer settlements, added another representative, her feathers a dull gray. They cannot maintain the atmospheric processors without human technicians. Lithin nodded grimly. And we have all received the same reports. Our people try to operate the systems humans left behind, but without understanding the underlying principles, they create more problems than they solve. In the Kepler expanse, Ambassador Su-Young Lim sat in her office reading the latest intelligence reports. The messages coming from Council space painted a picture of civilization in slow-motion collapse. She had served as a diplomat for 20 years, but she had never seen anything like this. The formal requests are increasing, her aide reported. 14 worlds have offered territorial concessions in exchange for technical assistance. The Vorthan Empire has offered to make humans equal partners in all their mining operations. And the desperate ones? 47 worlds have offered payments ranging from technology shares to complete sovereignty over their industrial sectors. 3 have offered to make humans the ruling species of their planets. Su-Young shook her head. 18 months ago, these same beings considered us barely above slaves. Now they want to make us rulers. They still don't understand what we actually want. The aide looked curious. What do we want? Respect, Su-Young said simply. Partnership. Recognition that intelligence comes in many forms, and that solving problems is as valuable as discovering new theories. On Haven Prime, General Kyung Min-oh briefed President Jae-won Shin on the military implications of the Council's collapse. The holographic display showed the galaxy in alarming detail. Red zones marked areas where government authority had broken down. Yellow zones showed regions under martial law. Green zones representing stable areas were becoming rare. The breakdown is accelerating, Kyung-min reported. Without reliable transportation and communication, the Council cannot coordinate responses to crises. Local governors are making independent decisions, sometimes contradicting each other. What about military threats? Jae-won asked. The hegemony fleet is struggling with maintenance issues. Half their ships are grounded because they cannot calibrate the hyperspace drives properly, but some of the outer species are mobilizing, sensing opportunity in the chaos. Jae-won studied the display carefully. Red zones were spreading like a disease across Council territory. How long before complete breakdown? At this rate? 6 months. Maybe less if the core infrastructure fails. The core infrastructure. Jae-won knew what that meant. The stellar engineering projects that powered galactic civilization were becoming unstable. If those failed catastrophically, entire star systems could be destroyed. Dr. Nari Kim was working on her final analysis when the emergency call came through. Her assistant burst into her office, face pale with alarm. Dr. Kim, we're receiving a priority signal from the Rigel system. It's not good. The holographic display showed the massive starlifting operation that had been running smoothly for 47 years. Human engineers had designed it to extract energy directly from the star's core, providing power for dozens of worlds. Now the readings showed dangerous fluctuations in the stellar magnetic field. The aliens don't understand stellar dynamics, Nari said, studying the data. They're following the operational procedures, but they're not making the intuitive adjustments that keep the system stable. What happens if it fails completely? The star could go into premature collapse. The explosion would sterilize everything within 15 light years. That includes 8 inhabited systems with billions of beings. Nari felt sick. This wasn't about politics or respect anymore. This was about survival on a galactic scale. Meanwhile, in the council chambers, the first formal apology was being drafted. Lithin had convinced the remaining representatives that pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. We were wrong, the message began. We failed to recognize the true value of humanity's contributions to our civilization. We treated partners as servants and wisdom as simple labor. We asked for forgiveness and for help. The message continued for several pages, offering everything the council had previously refused: equal representation, voting rights, territorial sovereignty, technology sharing agreements, formal recognition of human intellectual achievements. But most importantly, it offered something humans had always wanted: respect. The message was transmitted across space to Haven Prime. Where it arrived at the presidential palace in the early morning, Jaewon Shin read it over breakfast, noting the desperate tone and sweeping concessions. "They're finally ready to talk," he said to his wife, Minji. "The question is whether it's too late." Minji, who had supervised the evacuation of mining operations, understood the technical situation better than most. The stellar engineering projects are the real danger. If those fail, we won't have a galaxy left to negotiate about. Jaewon made his decision. Schedule a meeting with the senior staff. It's time to consider returning to Council space. But the situation was becoming more complex by the day. Some human colonies were reluctant to return to what they saw as a thankless role. They had built new lives in the Kepler expanse, free from alien oversight and condescension. "Why should we go back?" asked Captain Sung-Ho Lee during a heated council meeting. "They treated us like garbage for 50 years. Now that they need us, suddenly we're valuable?" "Because people are dying," replied Admiral Yuna Kang. "Whatever our grievances with the council leadership, billions of innocent beings are suffering because infrastructure we built is failing." Engineer Do-Hyun Park stood up from his seat. "It's not just about helping them. It's about proving that humans are capable of mercy, even when we've been wronged. That's what separates us from them." The debate raged for hours. Some wanted to return immediately and help prevent the disasters. Others wanted to negotiate from a position of strength, ensuring that humans would never again be treated as second-class citizens. In the end, President Jaewon made the decision that would shape the future of the galaxy. "We will respond to the Council's request," he announced, "but we go back as equals, not as servants. We help solve the immediate crises, but we also establish new terms for human participation in galactic civilization." As news of the decision spread across human space, ships began preparing for the journey back to Council territory. Engineers gathered their tools and technical manuals. Diplomats prepared negotiation strategies. Military officers planned security arrangements. The quiet exodus was about to become a triumphant return. But first, they had to prevent the collapse of civilization itself. The Rigel system's instabilities were growing worse each day, and time was running out to prevent a disaster that would make all their political victories meaningless. The real test of humanity's place in the galaxy was about to begin. 18 months after humanity's quiet departure, President Jaewon Shin walked through the great doors of the Galactic Council chambers. But this time everything was different. The alien representatives rose from their seats as he entered, a gesture of respect they had never shown before. His footsteps echoed in the hall, but now they carried the weight of authority, not servitude. Ambassador Soo-Young Lim walked beside him, carrying the new treaty that would reshape the galaxy. Behind them came Admiral Yuna Kang and a delegation of human leaders who had once been dismissed as mere technicians and maintenance workers. Counselor Lithan, now the Chancellor, greeted them at the podium. Her usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by humble gratitude. "President Shin," she said formally, "on behalf of the Galactic Council, I welcome you back to these chambers, not as subjects but as equals." Jaewon nodded politely. "Chancellor Lithan, we are here because the galaxy faces a crisis that threatens all of us. But we are also here to establish a new relationship between humanity and the Council. The first order of business was the Rigel crisis. The massive Starlifting operation was on the verge of catastrophic failure, threatening billions of lives. Admiral Kang had already dispatched emergency teams, but the situation required immediate Council approval for human ships to enter restricted space. "Our engineers are standing by," Jaewon announced to the assembly. "But we need guarantee of full operational authority. No interference, no oversight from species who don't understand the technology." The Thrakari delegate, humbled by his species' recent disasters, spoke up. "You have it. Full authority. Whatever you need." Similar agreements came quickly from the other representatives. The beings who had once micromanaged human work now begged to be left out of the decision-making process. Engineer Minji Park was already at the Rigel system, working frantically to stabilize the stellar engineering equipment. The aliens who had operated it for the past year had caused massive damage through their lack of understanding. The magnetic field regulators are completely out of alignment. she reported to her team. They've been running the system like a simple power plant instead of a delicate balance with stellar forces. Her assistant, Kyung-ho Nam, shook his head at the readings. It's amazing they didn't trigger a solar flare months ago. They did, Minji replied grimly. Several small ones. But they didn't understand what was causing them. They just kept following the operational manual, not realizing they were making the problem worse. Working around the clock, the human engineering teams began the delicate process of recalibrating the massive system. It required the kind of intuitive understanding that couldn't be taught from manuals. They had to feel the rhythm of the star itself, sensing the patterns in its magnetic field and plasma flow. 3 days later, the crisis was over. The Starlifting operation returned to stable function, its dangerous fluctuations contained. Minji allowed herself a moment of satisfaction as she watched the readings normalize. Another disaster prevented, Kyung-ho said tiredly. This time, Minji replied, but we need to make sure it doesn't happen again. The aliens need to understand why these systems work the way they do, not just how to operate them. Back in the council chambers, the real negotiations were beginning. President Jae-won sat at the head of the great table, no longer in the small human section but in the center where major powers belonged. The treaty he presented was comprehensive and non-negotiable. Full council membership with veto power over decisions affecting human-designed systems, he read from the document. Sovereign control over 200 worlds of our choosing. Recognition as the galaxy's primary engineering and infrastructure specialists. Chancellor Lithin nodded eagerly. Agreed, what else? Establishment of the Human Council Cooperative, with authority to train alien species in systems thinking and integrated engineering. No more treating complex technology as simple machinery. Of course, Lithin said. We understand now that we were wrong to dismiss human methods. Jae-won continued reading. Formal apology for 50 years of discrimination. Reparations in the form of technology sharing and resource access. And guarantee that human contributions to galactic civilization will be properly recognized in all historical records. The alien representatives agreed to everything. They had no choice. Their civilization was collapsing without human expertise, and they knew it. But Jae-won had one more requirement, the most important one. Respect, he said simply, not just in treaties and formal agreements, but in daily interaction. Humans are not servants or maintenance workers. We are partners in building and maintaining galactic civilization. The treaty was signed that day, but the real work was just beginning. Engineer Do-hyun Park found himself in an unexpected role. Teacher. The new Human Council Cooperative had made him responsible for training alien engineers in systems thinking. His first class included some of the galaxy's most brilliant minds, all struggling to understand concepts that humans took for granted. Your species think in linear sequences, he explained to a mixed group of Zephyrians, Vorthons, and others. Step A leads to Step B leads to Step C. But complex systems don't work that way. Everything is connected to everything else. Change one part, and effects ripple through the entire system in ways you can't predict with simple calculations. A Zephyrian student raised one of her forearms. But how do you know what changes to make without calculations? Do-hyun smiled. Experience, intuition, pattern recognition. Humans evolved to see connections that aren't obvious. It's how we survived on a dangerous world. We learned to sense when something was wrong before we could prove it mathematically. The lessons were difficult for the alien students. Their minds had evolved for specialization, not integration. But slowly they began to understand. The key wasn't just technical knowledge, but a different way of thinking about problems. Captain Sung-ho Lee, now promoted to admiral, oversaw the gradual restoration of galactic infrastructure. Human teams spread across council space, repairing the damage caused by 18 months of alien mismanagement. But this time they worked as consultants and advisors, not as subordinates. The hyperspace beacon network is back to 90% efficiency, he reported during a council session. Trade routes are stabilizing, but it will take years to fully repair the damage. More importantly, alien species were learning to appreciate the complexity of what humans did. The Vorthons, masters of logistics, discovered that their perfectly planned supply chains failed because they couldn't adapt to unexpected problems. The Thrakari, brilliant builders, learned that construction was only half the job. Maintenance and continuous adjustment were equally important. Dr. Nari Kim published her final analysis of the crisis, which became required reading throughout the galaxy. Her conclusions were clear. Specialization created brilliance but also fragility. The galaxy's survival depended on the human ability to see connections and adapt to changing conditions. Each species brings unique strengths to galactic civilization, she wrote. But without integrators, beings who can see how all the pieces fit together, those strengths become weaknesses. Humans evolved to be integrators, not because we're superior, but because our world demanded it. Ambassador Jiho Kim, who had delivered humanity's original withdrawal notice, found himself in a place of honor at council meetings. The quiet diplomat who had been ignored for decades was now one of the most respected voices in galactic politics. The crisis taught us all something important, he said, during his first address as humanity's senior representative. True strength isn't about dominance or superiority. It's about being indispensable through competence, wisdom, and the ability to help others succeed. 5 years after the Great Exodus, the galaxy looked very different. Humans held positions of authority throughout council space, but they used that authority to teach rather than dominate. The species that had once dismissed them as primitives now competed to host human advisors and send their best students to human engineering schools. The Galactic Council had learned the most important lesson in civilization. When you take the foundation for granted, everything built on it will eventually fall. Humanity had been that foundation all along, holding together a complex civilization through quiet competence and tireless dedication. Now they were partners in building something better. The galaxy was stronger, more resilient, and more cooperative than it had ever been before. And at the center of it all were the humans who had proven that sometimes the greatest power lies in being indispensable rather than invincible. The quiet species had found their voice, and the galaxy was listening.